Hello everyone and welcome to the Voice of Pharmacy. I'm your host Sharif Gorgi, and in today's episode we will be discussing the current state of the pharmacy profession and how effective or ineffective, depending on how you look at it, the Ontario Pharmacists Association has been in dealing with the changes and challenges that have impacted the profession over the past number of years. Before I go further, I would like to first disclose that I'm a current member of the OPA Board of Directors, and I also was a staff at OPA. So I've had the opportunity to see things from both sides of the fence, and I can guarantee you and give you my personal information that each and every single staff at OPA and each and every single executive at OPA and each and every single board member at OPA has the best interest of the profession at heart. The question becomes as to whether or not that interest is aligned with what the profession wants, needs, or even perceives. So to help me address that today, I would like to welcome Mike Kavanagh, the chair of the Ontario Pharmacy Association Board of Directors, and Alan Malik, the chief pharmacy officer at OPA. Gentlemen, welcome.
Pleasure. Thanks for having us.
So to start off, we hear a lot that OPA is run by corporate interest and that there is no voice of independent pharmacy at the OPA board table. So can you take a minute to kind of address that and clarify that misperception?
Sure. First of all, it's a great start, I think, to this conversation. It's been a long-standing misperception. And I think there's this perception, this belief that large corporate pharmacies have been dominating the voice at the table and that independents don't have that voice. In fact, there's even been this notion that there's been a reserved seat for corporate pharmacy. This isn't actually the case. And I want to explain maybe a little bit of the board composition. The board actually is composed of individual pharmacists. These are individual pharmacists who are actually elected by their own peers within their own geographic region of the province. More recently, going back probably about 5 or 6 years, we saw the introduction of an owners' council, an owners' advisory council, which allocated a seat at the board for both a corporate pharmacy representative and an independent pharmacy owner representative. And this is to allow the owner's perspective to be brought to the table. But generally speaking, when we look at the 17 plus 1, there are 17 elected members to the board with one observer, and that's a student observer. Of those 17 elected individuals, 12 of them are actually coming directly from the membership, right from the members themselves, selected within their geographic areas. And then we've got some more reserved seats for specific areas of practice. We have a seat that's designated for pharmacy technicians. We have a seat that's designated for a hospital pharmacist. We have a seat that's designated for a formal student representative. We have 2 directors at large. These are non-pharmacists and typically individuals that are appointed by the board of directors and usually coming from outside of the profession that bring a particular type of skill or knowledge set that the board perhaps is lacking. This could be someone from the insurance industry, someone from the legal profession, someone even from a payer industry. So these are bringing a particular set of information and knowledge that we don't have. And this is what rounds out our board. So really, when it comes right down to it, we're looking at 12 out of 17 individuals that are selected by the members themselves.
And so basically, no matter what happens in terms of that composition, there will always be a seat for independent pharmacy at the table through the owners' council.
That's correct, and that is a defined seat that has been designated by the board for an independent owner as well as a corporate owner. There's an equal balance, and we've taken great care to ensure that there is no, from those 2 positions, that there is an equal representation.
So for the benefit of those who don't quite understand what, or may not even know that OPA has an owner advisory council, can you tell us what the structure of that owner advisory council is and what it serves to be?
Sure. The Owners Advisory Council is essentially it's bringing both sides of the independents and corporates together into one council that can provide advice to the board, particularly around economics. It's where we've put a lot of their focus right now, since they have access to data that we can then utilize when we're making presentations and arguments to the government. So Right now, it's around 12 members on each side, so 12 corporate members as well as 12 independent members. So it's big. It's a big group, but it does allow us to get that diverse information and diverse opinion when we're leading into those discussions. It also allows us to have a heavy-weighted argument that we're getting both sides of the table when we're presenting to the government, saying we have listened to independents, we have listened to corporate sides as well. So we've taken the advice of both when we're formulating those arguments to the government.
Perfect. So I guess what I'm hearing is that there is no leaning towards one side or the other, that there is equal representation for all kind of different sectors of the profession at the OPA board table.
At all times.
Absolutely. And you know, Sharif, also it's worth pointing out there seems to have been over the years particular interest from independent owners in participating on the board of directors. And one of the things that highlights that the most is 5 of our last 8 board chairs were independent owners, including myself, Sean Simpson, Carlo Berardi, Daryl Moore, and Janet from the North. So we've had a lot of interest from independent owners in participating on the board as well as being actively engaged at the highest levels of the board.
Perfect. Well, thank you for sharing that, because I think that's a very good statistic that probably most people would not have been aware of. So, on that note, like, how do you answer people who say that OPA functions as the Ontario Pharmacy Owners Association, not the Ontario Pharmacists Association? And this is stemming mainly from the challenging working conditions to the deteriorating compensation, which makes them feel that OPA represents the interest of pharmacy owners and does not necessarily stand up for the interest of pharmacists and technicians who are the main members of the association.
It's a complex question, Sharif, and it's one that I think there's no really good one answer to it. But I think at the crux of it is OPA's interest isn't just with pharmacists, it's not just with pharmacies, it's not just with owners, it's with the pharmacy system. And included in that is ownership and is pharmacists. When we go to the government, however, which is usually our biggest stakeholder relations, the relationship that the government has with the pharmacy industry is with owners. They have contracted agreements with owners. So a lot of the times when we're going and speaking with the Ministry of Health in particular, we are representing the business side and the ownership side. But when you look at that at the system, as I was kind of alluding to, the more that we're able to support the system, the more it will support the pharmacists as well. So we have to kind of look at it as that vertical integration. Supporting the pharmacists allows for more, or pharmacies allows for more support for the pharmacists. That said, we have taken particular initiatives to help support pharmacists as well. Recently, although it started with the previous government and we're still working with this new government to find where it lands, we worked very diligently on the Employment Standards Act. We listened to members. We know that there was concerns from an employment standpoint that some pharmacists were being worked pretty hard, missing breaks, not getting that allotted time to rest. So we've taken action and taken a point of view to help support the Employment Standards Act, understanding that previously the Employment Standards Act was kind of you're in or you're out.
Right.
It didn't really fit the pharmacy model. So we were able to kind of come up with a hybrid model that we proposed to the government that they did like and they are considering, which would support that staff pharmacist who's working, 11-hour shifts and needs that lunch break, needs those breaks in the day without interrupting the business as well. So we found a kind of a nice hybrid model. So we are advocating on both sides of that too. And sometimes that gets missed because people do see that mostly the focus of what we do with the government. And yes, when we go to the government, a lot of the arguments that we're making are economic, and it's economic related to the business of pharmacy because that's where the relationship is with the ministry.
Right. Which, at the end of the day, the economics of pharmacy is a key component of the overall practice of pharmacy, because you need to have a viable, sustainable business to be able to have staff pharmacists employed.
Absolutely.
To be able, to deliver on those services. So, also, OPA had started a pharmacist council as well, similar to the Owners Advisory Council. There was a pharmacist council, that initiative that was started as well. What is the status of that, and how much uptake did you get on it?
So there was certainly at its outset when the Pharmacy Council was initiated, and this goes back to probably about 2007, 2008, and it basically was to be that sounding board for the government, that they would be able to take practicing pharmacists and to look at how the profession, and most importantly, the professional services that they wanted pharmacists to be providing, to look at how those best be implemented. And so when we look back at the creation of the MedCheck program, the Pharmacy Council was tasked with providing guidance, advice, recommendations to ensure that this was going to be, in fact, a very valuable program from a patient perspective, that this was going to be delivering better patient care. The unfortunate thing, we were a little bit saddened to hear that the government was, and this was not simply an approach with just Pharmacy Council, it was looking at all of the externally appointed secretariats, groups, councils that the ministry had set up, and they were basically being reconstructed, reclassified. And so the Pharmacy Council was actually put on what I would say a hiatus. It was put on kind of an indefinite hold. We were looking forward to keeping that conversation open because it gave us that venue. It gave us that opportunity to speak directly. And I know that we've had a lot of conversations internally and with the board about looking for another mechanism to bring the issues of OPA, the issues of pharmacists that we're hearing every single day through our practice support network, through calls into our drug information service, questions, concerns about how to implement certain policies, how do we tweak, how do we adjust certain types of programs. We need that sounding board, we need that opportunity, and we're looking for and that opportunity to re-engage with government, and we're optimistic with a new government we'll have that opportunity.
Perfect. Now, what about the Pharmacist Council that OPA had started that is similar to the Owners Advisory Council? Can you tell us a little bit more about that, when it was started, how many members do you have in it, what kind of uptake are you getting with that?
Yeah, we started that about 3-4 years ago, where we tried to introduce a similar model to the Owners Advisory Council that would be more of a staff pharmacist advisory council to the board. Realistically, I'll be honest, the uptake was pretty low. We're probably looking at a couple dozen pharmacists who actually signed up to participate in it. And when we tried to start engaging them, and actually we had a couple staff pharmacists on the board at that time, particularly Alan Brado and Jen Baker, and leading that council, trying to be staff pharmacist to staff pharmacist, and they had a couple town halls, and unfortunately just the uptake of it was minimal. So we've kind of put it on hiatus for now as we try to reconsider how do we adequately engage that group to kind of get the same level of output that we're getting from the Owners Advisory Council, but from a staff pharmacist standpoint. So it's still on our radar. It's not that we've just dropped the concept altogether. It's more about, we obviously took an approach that wasn't the best for pharmacists to get engaged with that, so we have to reconsider that and evaluate how we can kind of get that back up and running and be more effective.
Perfect. If I can add to that, part of it I believe was maybe impacted by some of the challenges that many pharmacists are facing right now every day in their practice, and getting free time to pull themselves away from their practice sites and to come to OPA or to attend a meeting. It was becoming very difficult from that perspective to get that time, that dedicated time to participate. It's not necessarily for lack of wanting to participate, for lack of engagement. It's a lack of an ability to attend, and it became very difficult to sustain this. The Owners Advisory Council is a self-sustaining entity, and there's a greater opportunity for owners to make that investment of their time. They have perhaps more flexibility to attend meetings that are relevant to owners. Pharmacists, it gets a little bit more tricky, and sustaining that model is one that we're trying to tackle, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to, revisit that type of an approach.
Which makes it a little bit challenging, because from one end, members, pharmacists and technicians, they feel that they want to be engaged, and they demand to be engaged, and they should be engaged. But when we try to look at ways to have them engaged, whether through surveys or through initiatives like the Pharmacist Council and so on, you end up being challenged with seeing a very low and poor engagement level. So how do you imagine that? What would the solution be to try to get people engaged so that they understand that it's not just about getting their input, but also their input has value?
Correct.
Yeah, and the one thing that we did recently that did show that there is that interest and engagement with pharmacists is we did a fairly comprehensive study and survey of members and non-members back in the fall of last year, and we did some different tactics to try to engage people to gain some interest, and actually we had good response. So we know that level of engagement is out there. It's about matching, as Alan said, they are stressed, they have a lot of time commitments already. So how do we manage that along with getting them involved? And I think we had some lessons learned from that because we had such a good uptake for it that sometimes focus groups, smaller focus groups work, a lot of digital connections work. So it's taking those learnings and building on them and just trying to get that higher level of engagement consistently. And hopefully we can do that more and more often.
Perfect. I think part of the challenge is that because of the diversity across the membership, across the pharmacy world, you've got owners, you've got pharmacists, you've got technicians, you've got students, and everyone has a particular preference in terms of how they want to be engaged, how they want to be approached by OPA, and how they want to interact with OPA. And so we're not looking at, we can't look at one solution to fit every audience. So we're going to be looking at multiple approaches. We're working very carefully now, very closely with our communications department to look at new and innovative ways to make sure that we are reaching our members with as much information as possible and trying to listen to them in any way they want to come back to us with their ideas and their thoughts.
So just shifting gears, a few years ago, OPA changed its tagline from being the voice of pharmacists in Ontario to advocating for excellence in practice and care. Is there a disconnect here between what OPA wants to advocate for and what the members actually want OPA to advocate for? Because I firmly believe that every pharmacy professional, whether it's a pharmacist or a technician, are their patient champion each and every day with each and every prescription that they dispense, with each and every service that they provide. So I'm personally struggling with seeing why would someone pay $600 a year so that you can make them better practitioner, but I see a lot of people who would want to pay you that so that you can be their voice. So what's your take on that?
It's a very well articulated point, Sharif. It is something that we have to try to manage. For one thing, the association, we have to also make sure that people understand the association's optically is seen from a lot of different stakeholders as well, which is important. It's not just an association of the membership, it's the association that also deals with the stakeholders, the ministry, insurers. So putting the patient first or a patient focus on our actions is important in the fact that when we go and we discuss programming with the ministry or we discuss funding with third parties, that they know that we're not just there for a group representing ownership or representing pharmacists trying to get them more money, that the angle that we're taking includes improving a patient healthcare outcome, improving patient access, all these good things for patients, which then benefit healthcare systems, benefit insurers. And at the end of the day, if we can do that with advocating for more funding, we can advocating for better practice and working conditions, that it's better for the pharmacists as well. So it's kind of this tightrope balance of making sure that we're letting our members know, which is probably more important than just what our tagline is. It's more around letting our members know what we're doing for advocating for them. If we can do that better, then it doesn't really matter what our tagline is to our membership. But we have to make sure that we also have that focus too, that we're just not an inward-facing organization, that we're an outward-facing organization. So it is a balance, but at the end of the day, it does come down to how we communicate with our members and making sure they understand our advocacy efforts.
So which brings us to a good point, because a lot of OPA's advocacy efforts are done under an NDA, which in a way kind of ties up your hand in terms of what you can share with the membership. So there is a lot of work that is being done in the background, but what ends up going to the profession is the outcome, and sometimes that outcome is much better than what things would have been if OPA was not involved. But because people don't see or have not had a chance to live with you through this whole process, they only see the outcome and they judge how effective you are based on that outcome. But if you're able to share with them from the beginning what the challenges that you're advocating for them are and how effective you've been, that obviously would have a different impact on the general membership. So I guess a couple of questions. First of all, why do you have to negotiate with the government under an NDA? And understanding the impact of that, is there anything that you can do differently as you move forward?
So I'll take a stab at this. It's a great question, and it really cuts right to some of the concerns we've heard from a lot of members. The NDA, no question that we were working with the government going back 2 or 3, 4 years when we were talking, and what led up to the funding cuts of 2015. That NDA was absolutely an absolute requirement for us to even get to the table. And let me back up a step on this. What the discussions were, the discussions that we were involved with, and we had known that government was in a cost cutting mode. They were looking for opportunities to obtain savings through the drug system. And in order for us to be able to effectively sit, and I will use the word negotiate because I want to be careful here, because we technically don't have formal negotiating power with the government, and that's another discussion that we can have. But in order for us to sit on those particular issues and the ideas that the government was bringing forward, in order for us to see and even to critique some of their thoughts and their ideas, we needed access to data that is actually confidential information to the Ministry of Health. In order for us to get that information, we needed to sign a non-disclosure agreement. OPA in and of itself does not have access to any type of economic data of that nature. The data is either housed by the Government of Ontario, the Ministry of Health, when we're talking about ODB claims. They're housed in the private payer sector by each individual private payer for their respective plans. And the data is also housed by individual pharmacies. None of these areas where this data resides, none of these areas give access to OPA to any of that data. So if we are going to get any data to be able to effectively advocate, negotiate, and challenge the government in this particular case, if we're going to be able to challenge them, we need to see the data. In order to get the data, the NDA was an absolute requirement.
So couldn't the NDA be only specific to the data portion but not the advocacy portion?
It could have indeed been set up in that manner. However, the NDA that was issued to OPA by the Ministry of Health was all-encompassing. It basically looked at protection of all data that was being shared with the association, as well as any of the messaging and the advocacy that went around it.
So moving forward, would you do that again, or would you take a different approach?
It's lessons learned for sure, and this was the first time that we really had that detailed engagement with the ministry on one specific topic that included so much data. So it was kind of a new scenario for us, for the organization. Not that we haven't had other discussions, but this one was somewhat unique. So I think we did have a lot of lessons learned from that, yeah, we have to make sure when the NDA, or if we have to go and sign an NDA, there's certain elements of it that we need to make sure protects the OPA as well, like being able to communicate progress to our members, helping them understand what's happening. So certainly we can take back the learnings that we had in that. And it's important too for people to understand this isn't unique to pharmacy. When the ministry holds all the cards, they have a lot of power. And they've done this in other circumstances with other industries as well. Particularly, I know with the insurance industry, it's happened as well, where they've made them sign NDAs and that they weren't even allowed to consult outside their own group. So while we do have to be a little bit more understanding and knowledgeable when we go in and negotiate an NDA with them, there's also the the element that they have the power to make the NDA whatever they want, but we just have to be a little bit more crafty and creative in how we deal with them in the future.
It's important to note that despite those conversations that were going on back in 2015, 2016, and the NDA that governed those conversations, that NDA actually still exists. We have not been released from that. That is until the government decides that the NDA can be dissolved. We are still bound to maintaining that information in confidence. But Mike is absolutely right. Lessons learned on a move forward, it's something that we are going to want to protect against. But the point being is that our hands were more or less tied in terms of the depth of that NDA, recognizing that we may not have liked the full construction of it. In order for us to get any type of data, any type of intel, we needed to sign it. If we chose not to sign that NDA because of its limiting nature, the ministry would have had complete control over all of the changes that were being posed on pharmacy. And most likely, the end result would have been a lot worse than what we're living with now.
And that's exactly the point, is that for most of the members of OPA, and even non-members alike, they don't see that kind of work and impact. So you're right that if OPA was not involved in that advocacy effort, the results would have been a lot worse. People are still not happy with the result, but that's all they see, and that's why they attribute that immediately to poor advocacy efforts, right?
I'm going to give you an example. I referenced the term negotiate, that we don't have a formal negotiating status. And this is true. To this day, we do not have formal negotiating status. What that means basically is that there is no obligation of the government to actually sit down and actually have a conversation with us on any file. They can do, because they are government, because they have the full control, they can make any decisions they want to. When they consult with us, when they work with us and they talk with us, it's at their choosing. There's no obligation for them to listen to everything that we say, or anything that we say for that matter. But that said, in light of the fact that we don't have that negotiating status, what I can say, and I look back to the flu shot campaign, when we got the flu shot, got access to the flu shot program back in 2012, the original go-in offer from the government was they're not going to pay us anything. They weren't going to pay us a cent. And their thought was that this would be a windfall for pharmacy, and that pharmacy would make up any costs that would be incurred in delivering a flu shot simply through volume, by traffic through the pharmacy. And we went back to the government, we advocated, we made brought forward the messages from our board and from our committees to basically say that this is in fact not the case. The government did reconsider. They came back with a second offer of $5. That $5 was also rejected by OPA, saying it was still compensating pharmacy below the cost of delivery. They again went back to the table and settled on a $7.50 fee. Is it a far cry from the $18 in Alberta? Absolutely. But what remains to, and what many people don't know, is that if we had not intervened, we would not likely be receiving any type of funding for our injections.
So that's exactly the point, that many people don't know that. And this is a very good example of a big misperception out there, because I hear a lot, I'm sure again you hear a lot, that people say, how come we're only getting $7.50 for the flu shot when Alberta is $20 and so? But that whole process that you just shared, and the fact that the government was coming out at the beginning was $0, and that because of OPA's intervention, it moved to $7.50. I don't know that too many people know about that. And so what's preventing you from sharing that information? And at that time, was there still an NDA in place?
So not on that, no. But this all stems back to kind of a point we made earlier around communication to our membership. It's important, as Alan said, to almost highlight to members what a world would have looked like without OPA, and how we were being successful in lessening the pain, which is kind of a rough way to look at it, but sometimes that's what OPA does, depending on what the ministry wants in terms of an objective. So, but we have to become better at advocating for ourselves in terms of us advocating for OPA, the work that we do, to show the membership, the advocacy work we've done on their behalf. It kind of, I always kind of laugh and think it's kind of that passive nature of pharmacy. We're not really, pharmacists are really hard at being very selfish and being very proud of themselves and kind of announcing that. But we have to. OPA has to do that as an organization. We've done it better over the last 12 months to 18 months. You've seen things like prescribing action come through in emails that highlight some of the work that OPA has done. But it's still not enough. We need to do a lot better in terms of our communication. Alan has said the communications department is becoming much more robust in terms of the work that they're doing, and they're working hard to do that. We still need to do it better. We still need to let members know the successes of OPA, let them know what their money is doing for them. And that's the challenge that we have to overcome, because it's hard in today's age to reach 16,000, 17,000 pharmacists and let them know what's happening and what you're doing for them. But we're certainly trying some new tactics, and some of them we're seeing some success with.
Well, yeah, that makes sense, especially that not necessarily everyone follow the same process and how they receive information. Some people read emails, some people check out videos, and so on. But I want to go back to the point that you made, Alan, that you said the NDA is still in place. So even with the change of government, that NDA is still in place, and does that govern future negotiations as well, or can you clarify that a little bit?
Sure. So the NDA is in fact still in place because, quite simply, it's a legal document. It's a legal document, and until that legal document is mutually terminated, then we are no longer bound by it. But it would survive any change in government. We are optimistic that, and we're eager to sit down with the ministry to relook at whether that particular NDA can be dissolved, or whether on a move forward basis that we can proceed without any future NDAs, so that we're able to communicate with our members more effectively, more openly, on matters that are truly affecting their practice and affecting their business.
Now, to one part of that question, though, Sharif, the NDA was specific to that $150 million initiative that was announced in 2015. So it doesn't pertain to any of the conversations that we're having on other files with the ministry, and that's important to know. Yes. And really, at this point, Alan makes a good point. We should be asking for that NDA to be absolved because the work that we've done on that file is finished. But at the end of the day, it is finished. We need to be forward thinking, and our members need us to be forward thinking. So while we did have the NDA on that file, we've had some learnings from it. The most important thing is we want to take those and be better in the future, and let's focus on those.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It makes sense. But also the reality is the impact of that 150 million cut, people live through it each and every day. So whether we want to move forward from it or not, people are still feeling that impact. So it's still good to try to go back and explain to them what that impact actually could have been like. So again, it's something that I think it would be good to, like you said, Alan, with the new government, to try to see if we can revisit that. Now, just shifting gears to the comparison that people often make between OPA and the OMA, and feeling that the OMA is more effective in standing up for their members' interests and more effective in their negotiation with the government. Does the OMA, to your knowledge, negotiate with the government under NDAs, and also why do you believe that there is that perception out there that the OMA is more effective?
Let me take a start. Let me start this, and Mike, you can add some of your comments to this. But I don't even know if it's really perception. I think the OMA actually does. First of all, they do have negotiating status. That was conferred to them going back probably into the early 90s. I believe it was either 92 or 93. When the OMA Act was created, and effectively the OMA was given what is called the RAND formula, which is essentially mandatory membership and representation rights. So the OMA is the de facto representative voice for physicians across, all physicians across the province of Ontario, which now therefore obligates the government and the OMA to enter into confidential, and I would dare say it's probably all still covered through non-disclosure by virtue of this negotiation, this formal negotiation status. It gives them that opportunity to have those conversations on an ongoing basis. And this is probably why the OMA does have that greater opportunity to speak on behalf of their members. They have been given that right. This is not something that we have control over. This is something, as much as I would love to be able to have that negotiation capabilities, that formal representation for the profession, as much as we would like that, that needs to be conferred by government. That needs to be entrenched in regulation, and it's not something that I believe the government wants to go down.
Now, so that was my next question on that, is the fact that this has happened with the OMA, do you think that there is any opportunity that OPA can ask for that same right? Has OPA asked for that before, and do you think that's something that could be granted at some point?
Yeah, we've had those conversations with the previous government, and we've floated the idea with them because there's mutual benefits to it, obviously. Certainly there doesn't appear to be an appetite on the ministry side for that sort of an arrangement, particularly if you look at their sort of battled history with the OMA that they've had in recent years. They don't probably want to start looking at creating environments that allow an OPA relationship like that with the ministry. From their standpoint, you know, if you asked logically, why would the ministry want an agreement where OPA has negotiating rights when their current environment allows them to hold all the cards or hold all the power? Empowering us doesn't necessarily provide them anything but headaches. So for asking for that, we need to prove to them that there would be that mutual benefit as to why they would want OPA to have that right and that authority, and what that would provide the ministry in terms of reassurances, whether that's financial commitments or whether that's even just publicity, you know, because that means a lot to the ministry. So if we're going to go down that road again, we know that we have to highlight not just the benefits to OPA and pharmacists, but also to the ministry and patients. And it's a tough argument to make sometimes.
And I appreciate that. Now, one way of looking at it is that we don't have to necessarily wait for the government to give us that power or to empower us. We can look at ways for us to empower ourselves. So if we were to look at one key initiative or something that could be looked at as a call to action that would gather all members of the profession to become members of OPA in 2019, which will give us, you know, that empowerment, what would it be?
So there's probably two that I think right now are probably the most prevalent in terms of just, you know, peeling all the layers away and just looking as a practicing pharmacist. The two that are most important right now are probably preferred provider networks and the role that our industry can play in that. I know you speak to any pharmacist, they've been, you know, impacted by a preferred provider network where they've lost a patient or lost access to a patient, and the frustration that's there through providing that continuity of care. So I think that, and it's a rallying cry from pharmacy owners, pharmacists, pharmacy technicians. Everyone's impacted the same. So I think that's one that a lot of people can get behind to support the organization and say that we need to have a better model that supports the pharmacy industry and patients for this. Another one that's of particular interest these days is cannabis, obviously, because we know the model of cannabis right now excludes pharmacy. Medical cannabis goes directly from a licensed producer to a patient, and the traditional model that exists and exists for good reason to involve a pharmacist has been excluded from that. So we know that we want pharmacy to be involved in that. We want pharmacists to have the interaction on medical cannabis. We know it would be better for patient outcomes. We also know from a pharmacy industry standpoint, there would be a lot of financial incentive for that, which, as we talked about, putting money into the pharmacy system does support downstream for pharmacists as well. So if you wanted a rallying cry right now for the two biggest issues that I think impact every practicing pharmacist and pharmacy technician and pharmacy owner, corporate or independent, those would be it, preferred provider networks and cannabis.
So for the purpose of that call to action, would you consider having a membership category that is only related to advocacy, so that if somebody doesn't want to pay $600 because they don't want to be getting the education, or they don't want to be getting a gym membership discount or so on, but they just want to have a voice, and they want you to be their voice, and they want to be able to support you to accomplish those two key advocacy initiatives that you said. So is that something that you have explored, or that's something that you think can happen in the future, where you can just have a membership category that is at a lower level, but that's all you get from it?
I don't want to say that we have specific examples of what would be considered in terms of different membership levels, because they really haven't been vetted at multiple levels within the organization. But what I can say, Sharif, which is for sure, is we know that traditional membership models for organizations is under threat, not just OPA, but if you look across the spectrum of member-based organizations, the way that they traditionally ran, where it used to be you bought a membership and a lot of the benefits you got was, advocacy, but like you said, the gym membership and lower insurance rates on home and auto. Those things don't really seem to matter much for memberships anymore. Right. So in that sense, the membership model in general is changing. So we need to, as an organization, consider other opportunities. That would be one that this is why we have a membership committee. That membership committee is made up of practicing pharmacists, practicing technicians, pharmacy owners from independent and corporate. So it's a diverse group that can kind of look at what matters now for members, what is important for members, and then supports that with recommendations up through staff and then eventually to the board. So that's where those types of discussions are happening, and they are happening. So hopefully we can kind of look at some unique and kind of novel ways of supporting non-members in becoming members in some level, in some respect.
I want to add something to this, and Mike, you've addressed it bang on. From the operational side, being senior staff here at OPA, I think it's important to know for your listeners to know, for all members and non-members alike to know, that there are multiple files that we are working on pretty much a daily basis. Many of which really don't even see the light of day. For example, work in the area of WSIP, work in the area of NIHB. Not files that are terribly, at least at this particular point in time, loud or impactful yet. But these are files that we are currently involved with on a regular basis. So there's a lot that bubbles under the surface at OPA from the number of files that we are watching, following, managing. I raise this because the advocacy work, the policy work that goes on at OPA doesn't happen in a vacuum. It needs to be supported. So while we are absolutely wide open to ideas, and which is why we have a membership committee that is looking at multiple and any options, we're not at a point where we're going to shut ourselves out to any ideas. But at the end of the day, much like pharmacy owners and any other business for that matter, we need to be sustainable, we need to be viable. And the work that we do on a day-to-day basis needs to be sustainable, and quite frankly, we need the support of our members. We run into problems when we start parceling off our membership into various categories based on the needs and wants of the members. Yes, absolutely, we are wide open and very, very much open to hearing what that value proposition for members and the variety of members, what that needs to be. But we live in a symbiotic world. Just as much as pharmacists, members right now and non-members need a rallying cry from an association like OPA. We want to have that strong voice and that strong unified voice. As much as pharmacists want that, we also want membership. We need the support of membership. And it's important that we don't dilute the work that we're doing too much, so that we have the numbers, but we don't have the resources to do what we need to do on a daily basis.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I guess, that's always a challenging proposition, because from an advocacy perspective, as an advocacy body, you need to have the numbers. That's what gives you power.
Absolutely.
As you advocate. From the other end, yes, you have an operation that you need to sustain, and like you said, like any pharmacy business operation, and that requires resources, it requires funding. So it's a challenge, but I think that still something that's worth to look at, because you can look at, if I were to lower the membership fee, but have more members, you can probably be able to serve better your advocacy purposes, plus at the same time have almost the same kind of revenue to be able to sustain your expenses. So again, it's something that we're not going to resolve today, but it's just, I think it would be good to at least know that there is that appetite to explore it and see whether or not it would make sense.
What I can say is that we are wide open, and our committee is wide open to any and all types of ideas, because what we do know is the status quo needs to be changed, and we're looking to embrace more and more non-members. We're looking to retain the members that we currently have, and we're open to all kinds of ideas and thoughts.
Perfect. Now, Mike mentioned two key advocacy opportunities or key advocacy priorities, that you're looking at gathering people around, which is the PPNs and the cannabis. Can you talk to us about what other key advocacy initiatives, just from a high-level perspective, that OPA is currently working on?
Sure. I think it comes as no surprise. For the longest time, we've been talking about and pursuing advocacy efforts to enable pharmacists to assess and, if necessary, to treat common ailments. It's a big ask, no question. It flies most notably right in the face of the traditional model where physicians and now nurse practitioners are the primary care providers. But quite frankly, when we're looking at issues such as hallway medicine, when we're looking at long wait times before a patient can even get seen by their physician or by the nurse practitioner, clogging up emergency rooms, we believe pharmacy has something very valuable to offer. And it's not a real stretch. This is how pharmacists are now being trained in the faculties of pharmacy, both at the University of Toronto and the University of Waterloo. Pharmacists are fully trained right now and equipped to deal head-on with many of these common ailments that can decrease a lot of the strains on our system. So this is an area that we are not letting go of. We believe fundamentally that this is something that can help the system. Is it a quick fix? Well, clearly it's not. We've been advocating on this file since 2008, and we've got interest, but we haven't gotten it across that finish line, and it's simply because there are political barriers that we still need to navigate. The logic is there. We still have to navigate the politics.
Well, it's the logic and the reality. When you look at what pharmacists do every day, we do assess for minor ailments each and every day.
Absolutely.
It's not something that we need further training for. We would need further training on the prescribing aspect, but currently we're limited by either offering an over-the-counter solution, for that patient, or to refer the patient to the doctor or to the emergency room, which add to the constraint on the healthcare system. So when you look at the reality, it is the day-to-day reality that we live in, and I don't think anybody would argue with the fact that by allowing pharmacists to do more and to prescribe, to be able to give that patient the right medication at the right time, would allow for the ER to be more free for those who actually need it, would allow the physicians' offices to be more available for those who actually need it. So what is the challenge in making the business case? And I think the reason why I also bring up the business case, because we don't want to be just getting the scope without the reimbursement, because and there's nothing wrong in talking about that, because when we offer a service, like any business, and the community pharmacy is a retail business, when you offer a service, you have to be properly compensated for it. Mm-hmm. So are you seeing that the challenge with getting this further is because of the compensation piece, or is because of any other factors that is just not allowing us to proceed with that?
So I want to make sure that when we say this too, that it's under the purview of these negotiations, if you will, were with the previous government. We haven't had a chance. We're meeting actually with the Minister of Health tomorrow to start to get this new government's mindset on these pieces. So really the context that we offer is pre-government change. I think it's important for people to know. But so when we were having these conversations previously, compensation was certainly an area that does raise concern for the government, because no matter what, we know that the system is saturated with patients. So if you're diverting patients from an ER or a walk-in clinic to a pharmacy for a minor ailment, someone's still taking that spot. So the costs only go up. They're just adding a new cost to the system to reimburse pharmacy to provide the minor ailments. Secondly, we know the previous government had a large mindset that was more about funding the gaps. And they didn't see pharmacists providing minor ailments as funding gaps. They saw it as, we already do provide the service through family physicians, nurse practitioners, ER, and walk-in clinics. So all we're doing is duplicating the service in a pharmacy. So those were really two of the biggest hurdles. Again, with the previous government, I'm not necessarily saying they're good arguments. It's just the arguments that they made to us as to why they lack the interest. The compensation piece is one that's really interesting, and I think it's worth the conversation within ourselves about, we always want to see the ministry fund us appropriately for services. And we understand that. We should be paid for what we do, and we should be paid appropriately for what we do. At the same time, we shouldn't be afraid to look at that service or other services as being patient funded. So if a patient wants the service, then they pay for it at a rate that we set, instead of being influenced by a ministry dictating a price. We always complain about the ministry setting our dispensing fee too low, setting the fee for flu shots too low. So there is a sense of irony sometimes that we also then want to tie services to ministry funding when we know it will be below market value, because that's how they fund programs. So we have to consider sometimes when we go in and we look at these services that maybe we shouldn't necessarily tie it to ministry funding. We should always be asking to be funded, but it shouldn't impede us from looking at getting the scope and then implementing allowing pharmacists to follow the Ontario Pharmacists Association fee guide and fee recommendations on what you should be charging patients for these services as well. So it's kind of a double-edged sword on that, but it's a conversation that we have to have within our industry.
And I appreciate that. I think that the challenge is because of the nature of community pharmacy, that it's a retail business, and retail business means that there is competition.
Yep.
And that's where it becomes a problem, where by allowing or promoting or encouraging for pharmacy owners to offer the services and charge for it, that's where it becomes a matter of sometimes the competition becomes not on the offering of the service, but on the cost of the service. So that's the reason why a lot of people feel that it is better to get the service with the reimbursement, as long as that there is a good business case made for the ministry for it. So again, it's one of the things that we will have to continue to discuss and explore. And I know that the OPA has had a fee guide since the 90s. The reality is not a lot of people even know, that fee guide was there. So what are you doing to promote that fee guide and to encourage pharmacists and pharmacy owners to promote their services and charge for them in this kind of volatile environment right now?
I guess the simple answer to that is the fee guide is on our website. It's accessible now. I think what I need to do is make sure that it's not it's not a protected document. But I think a case can now be made that if this is how we need to see it, if we need to see a shift in terms of how the profession as a whole wants to move forward. If there's a willingness, and we're looking at something like common ailments prescribing and assessing, if we were given that authority, then we would want all pharmacists to have access to that fee guide, member or not member. Quite frankly, the document is out there. The document exists, so I believe it is now fully available to members and non-members alike. I did want to touch on one point that Mike had made, and it is important because I've heard this in a number of different pharmacy settings, questions as to why the funding of certain services, why we're not getting the same funding level as physicians. And Mike addressed it absolutely correctly, that the way government will look at when they're looking at pharmacists being added to added as a provider of a service, government is certainly not interested in looking at an equivalent funding model. Whether it's the same service, we can argue and probably fully agree that it's the same service. And I look at the flu shot. Is the flu shot given by a pharmacist the same exact service as a flu shot administered by a physician? Absolutely. Does a physician get more money, more compensation out of a flu shot than a pharmacy does? Absolutely they do. Is that fair? I'd probably say no. But that's the reality. The government is not going to be looking at a Me Too type of funding model. They're looking for cost savings, and this is the unfortunate reality when we're, in a sense, trying to get ourselves inserted more into primary care.
Well, the government is looking for cost savings, which makes sense. What we're trying to say is that we can help you get cost savings so you have a sustainable healthcare system, but we need to make the business case, that by funding us for certain services, it will be cheaper for them down the road, or more cost effective for them down the road.
Right.
Again, it's one of the things that I believe we need to continuously try to educate the government on. And I want to go back to one of the points you've made, Mike, about the fact that now there has been a change in government, and with that change in government, do you see that this more of a positive change for pharmacy?
That's tough to know yet. We like to think that just having a change is probably a good thing. We had a government that was in power for a long time. They had certain mindsets, certain beliefs, certain things that they thought about pharmacy and other industries that maybe weren't right. So just getting that kind of new mindset in there is definitely beneficial. Reality is this government is still taking over what they've now announced as a $15 billion deficit. So they have fiscal pressures and fiscal problems that they need to address. So your point is very well made about every argument that we make to this government has to have that kind of fiscal business case to it. That not only are you supplementing pharmacy with either new income or just not taking away income, it's benefiting you downstream in this way. So we have to articulate those arguments well. So we'll have a better, like I mentioned earlier, we're meeting with the Minister of Health for the first time tomorrow, so we'll have a better sense of where we sit with this government or what our direction will be with this government. I don't want people to think that just because there's been that change, suddenly the world is going to be suddenly improved overnight. A couple things we have to keep in mind is, like I said, is one, that deficit that they have to deal with, and two, it's going to just take them a while to start learning how to govern the province and learning these files. So we're going to do our work, but it's a race. It's a kind of playing the long game with this government. We're not looking for short, quick wins because we know we probably won't get them. We're going to have to play the long game with them and work with them through 4 years, and that's kind of the key thing. So I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful that this will be a new attitude towards pharmacy, and hopefully we can start to see some improvements.
No, absolutely, and I in a way that's encouraging. I see that this government, from everything that they have shown over the past few months, that they are fiscally responsible government, that they would be looking at achieving fiscal gains, but at the same time they understand the economics of the businesses and the importance of supporting small business as well. So there is an opportunity, for us to again make it a good, valid business case as to why we're able to support them in having a sustainable healthcare system by allowing us to have a bigger scope with reimbursement, for us as necessary. And again, we're not asking for reimbursement on every single scope expansion, but where it makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I think I actually am encouraged, and some call me perhaps a bit of an overt optimist, but I am looking at this this new government positively. We have a long-standing relationship with now the Minister of Health and Deputy Premier, Minister Elliott. If many of your listeners may recall that she was the health critic for the PCs while the Liberals were forming the government, and we met with Christine Elliott many times. So she's very familiar with OPA. She's very familiar with pharmacists, and most importantly, very familiar with the opportunities that can come through community pharmacy and pharmacy as a whole. And I expand that because I include family health team pharmacists, I include hospital pharmacists. So she clearly understands the issues that we are bringing to the table. We also have a very solid relationship with the Minister of Finance, the guy that holds the purse strings for this province. And this is very important. It's a very important relationship that we have established with the Ministry of Health. We're currently talking with him as well as with the Attorney General on matters related to cannabis. So, and we actually had Minister Fedeli in our boardroom talking with our board about the issues confronting pharmacy, and he was very receptive to a lot of the messaging that we were putting forward. So we've got some good, strong alliances already with this new PC government. A couple things a couple buzzwords that are now floating around within government circles, also within the regulatory circles in general. There's these notions of quality and value. And these are going to be buzzwords moving forward. We talked about being fiscally responsible. That doesn't necessarily mean cuts. It just may mean strategic investments in certain types of programs and offerings and services. And so it goes back to what Mike was saying, is that we need to be very mindful that we need to bring a business case to the government pretty much with every meeting that we're going to have with them to make our point that what we are asking for, what we are seeking on behalf of pharmacists across Ontario is an ability to help impact the system to drive better patient care, better value for the money that we are asking them to invest in the profession, and quality that will speak to a better quality return for patients and health outcomes.
Absolutely, and I think on that front, nobody can disagree. The one thing that we just have to make sure we sometimes may need to push a little bit back on is on the value, or if we're asked to show our value to our patients. I can appreciate that we may have to have a business case to show value for cost savings for the government, but sometimes when we get asked about the showing the value that of the services we're offering to our patients, that's when it becomes a little bit tricky, because I can't think of any other profession, whether it's like doctors or nurses or dentists, who have to show those kind of studies and embark on those researches to show to the government that they offer value to their patients. So I think it's one of those points where we have to start pushing back a little bit on, especially when we get asked to or we get questioned about the value we offer to our patients. We have to completely stand behind the fact that our members each and every day provide very high level value to their patients, and this is not something we ever want to discuss or we even would be willing to entertain to validate. However, what we would be open to validate and to discuss and make a business case for is the value to the healthcare system and so on.
Yeah, it's always anytime we take an approach in any conversation with the government, it is kind of that balancing act of trying to articulate our point, our standpoint from a patient lens, a professional lens, and a ministry lens, and ensuring that you're right that it is odd that we sometimes have to just prove that what we're doing is good when we know what we're doing is good. And I would say a lot of different areas of health right now is under the same scrutiny, though. I think that's a bit of a misconception that only pharmacy has to show their value. This is value, as Alan said, is a buzzword with this government, and it's not just from a government standpoint, it's from a bureaucracy standpoint. So that's going to continue despite the government change. The value, the importance of value, the importance of quality is something that they are really interested in, and also interested in it from a measurement standpoint. They want to be able to measure basically every service that they're offering and paying for now. In pharmacy, in medicine, in nursing, across the board, So there is a large level of scrutiny for everyone. So we have to be cognizant of that in every conversation and present any arguments that we make from that lens to make sure that we're hitting the right touch points with them when we have those conversations, so that they have an understanding that we have an understanding of it. And using those kind of techniques and those tactics will probably be very beneficial for us.
It's this relationship that we are about to embark on with the new progressive conservative government will be certainly an interesting one. We've been living with a liberal government for so long, we've almost forgotten how to deal with a government that is willing to listen to and take a look honestly at the messaging they're bringing forward. And I look to a reference, a comment you made earlier, why we have to continually prove what we do. When data exists, whether it's Ontario data, Canadian data, or US data, in fact, even global data, when there's evidence out there that supports pharmacists taking a bigger role in primary care, taking on more services to provide the value added that patients need and that their systems need, yet we still have to do a Made in Ontario study to demonstrate that Ontario can do it. Well, we're tired of having those conversations too. And we're very, very hopeful and optimistic that this government will be take a fresh look. We've got all the data that exists out there through our Drug Information and Resource Center. We have all that data. It's just a matter of just showing it to them. We don't have to recreate it.
And it's very encouraging, to hear that for sure. Now, Mike, do you think if OPA had a pharmacist as CEO over the past number of years, that the current state of the profession would have been different? But that's one of the things that obviously I'm sure you've heard about it, that a lot of pharmacist members and non-members, brought it up as a concern.
Well, it's almost impossible to hypothesize what would have changed or what would have been different, even with different CEOs, be it pharmacists or not. So it's, I don't want to get into that hypothesis too much. I can tell you this, that what's kind of overlooked by a lot of people, and I understand people's interest in wanting to have a pharmacist in that leadership role. It does reflect the profession very well.
It's more about the perception.
Exactly. At the end of the day, when you look at the role of the CEO, they're not just the voice of the profession. I mean, no matter what, when we go into negotiations or conversations with the government, usually the chair of the board is there who is a pharmacist, or other members of the board are there who are pharmacists. Our CPO is there who is a pharmacist. So we always do have pharmacist representation at stakeholder meetings as representatives of the organization. And the CEO's role is certainly more about managing the organization from an executive standpoint. So what I can tell you, because I'm sure a lot of people are aware that we're transitioning into a new CEO. We have an interim one who is a pharmacist right now, actually. But we are looking to transition into a longer term, more permanent CEO. And a lot of the traits and a lot of the skill sets that we're looking for are things like leadership skills, and certainly someone who's going to be a change agent to shift the direction of the organization. At the same time, we know and we've learned that a lot of that comes with requirements to be a stakeholder relations person as well, and stakeholder relations comes sometimes is a lot easier if the person is a pharmacist. So long story short, kind of as we're looking to that long-term solution, we're looking at those skill sets, and if we can find someone with those skill sets and those attributes that we want, who is also a pharmacist, I think that will add a lot of value, because we understand the perception out there that there are people who see the importance of having a pharmacist at the head of the organization that advocates for them.
Absolutely, and I think as the challenges continue, the current landscape continues to get tighter and tighter. Mm-hmm. That's where that perception goes a little bit higher.
Yeah. I think perception is everything, and I think the thing that OPA needs the most right now is a win, and then communicating that win. Right. And I think that can change the perception. And a win's hard because it's as we've talked about the struggles, and Alan did a great job of articulating our hopes with this government. But there's still limitations of what they're going to be able to do this early in their term. So we have to figure out what a win is, and we have to. Sometimes a win is not a loss. And then advocating that to our members that we did this for you. And I think that the more we can do that, and it goes back to our earlier conversations about communication and improving communication, I think that's really important.
Perfect, and I think certainly through this that people will be able to get that message and continue to be involved. Alan, what do you perceive the key challenges and opportunities for pharmacy over the next year to be? Are there any changes or new regulations coming up that people should be watching out for?
I think it's I'll take the second part of your question first. Quite simply, my crystal ball is still quite foggy in terms of what is going to be changing with regards to regulations, legislation. We haven't yet had that opportunity to sit down with the Minister of Health or even the bureaucracy. We're looking forward to that. As Mike said, we're meeting tomorrow with the Minister of Health. But health has not really, even the ministries themselves are still getting themselves constructed with policy advisors, and they're getting up to speed. So we haven't heard of what's coming down the pike. But in terms of some of the challenges, I look at challenges as more as opportunities, because what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I think we've got nowhere to go but up. And again, I am that optimist. I believe that we have, our best days lie ahead of us. But I think our biggest challenge and our biggest opportunity here is to drive unity, to drive engagement and involvement in the profession. And I look to your listeners, and I'm hopeful that the messaging that they're hearing is something that is resonating with them, because we do need that unity in the profession. We spoke about having that mandatory membership like the OMA has, and Mike articulated appropriately that it's probably not in the government's best interest. And I say that simply because they probably look to the fact that we are, divided based on competition and other factors. That divisiveness works in their favor, and it gives the organization, perhaps that less of a power. So to your point that you made, if we can take it upon ourselves to put out that rallying cry and get as many pharmacists to join the association, so we can say categorically, we represent the vast majority of pharmacists in the province of Ontario. We can speak very confidently and competently for their needs and for the betterment of patients and the system. I think that is going to go a long way. And I think that's our opportunity and our challenge at the same time.
Absolutely, and I really think that ultimately the goal would be to try to unify everybody behind one entity and one voice, and hopefully, the goal from this episode here today, that everybody would have had an opportunity to have some clarification of some of the misperceptions and misconceptions that were out there about what OPA does or doesn't do, and how effective or ineffective the advocacy efforts are. So with that, Alan and Mike, thank you for a very informative discussion, and thank you everyone for tuning in. And remember that in order for us to have an empowered profession, we need to first have an engaged profession. And in order to have an engaged profession, we need to have a properly informed profession. So I hope that you found this discussion today to be informative, and see you next time.